It's a new dawn, it's a new day, and it's time to return this channel to reviewing Raw and SmackDown weekly. And I can't wait to see what 2018 has in store for me and for the WWE as a whole. As ladies and gentlemen, it is time to welcome you back to Wrestling Rant. The reviews for Raw and SmackDown over the course of Wrestling Rant's new lifespan will be done under a new system, the 3-strike rule. Now, going through the show segment by segment, if I find something that is unnecessary, poor, pointless, or just plain bad, then I will give it a strike. And if 3 are accumulated over the course of the show's runtime, the review will be shortened, necessarily right where that 3rd strike is taken, meaning the rest of the show is only brought to your attention through short sum-ups. Meaning if the review goes on really long, you know that one or both shows have actually done pretty well over the course of this week. If not, and it ends up being really short, then you know that Raw and SmackDown have done a really bad job. It's pretty simple. And with that in mind, let's crack on with the shows at hand. Things kicked off on Raw with Alexa Bliss and Kurt Angle talking backstage. The segment was short, sweet, concise and to the point, establishing Alexa Bliss as a whiny smartass bitch heel who does her best to get out of it but not so, and Angle as the authoritative GM who doesn't back down from his dealings. Very well done, it was fine to kick off the night, and we then had an in-ring segment featuring Angle, the Jason Jordan scenario involving the Bar and Seth Rollins, and all that palaver. Overall, the segment was fine. Jason Jordan had a very good, non-cringy, and quite good snapback to Cesaro's poor dentistry. Nice. Overall, the rules of the Raw Rumble for the women were also announced, and well, basically, I'm not a huge fan of the 30 women stipulation to it because we now have 2 Royal Rumbles taking up 2 hours of a 4-hour show, so don't expect to have too many matches on the pay-per-view card. Overall, though, it built up to the antagonism towards Jason Jordan and Cesaro for the match we were about to see. The segment did its job. Seth Rollins came across as a condescending prick to his new tag team champion partner, and overall, I can't be too bad about that because it then stirs the pot around the potential heel turn for Jason Jordan, and we're all looking forward to seeing him go off on one later, I can be certain to that. And speaking of Jordan, we of course saw the match with Cesaro just afterwards. Of course, this was to showcase Jason Jordan's ability, even though he got beaten up for most of it. Jordan's selling was nice, and the springboard crossbody counter was lovely. Overall, though, the crowd seemed to lose interest early on because Jordan was just being beaten down methodically and slowly, but the match was fine. It was still enjoyable. He had enough going for it to where I could enjoy it, and Jason Jordan getting the shock win and then just rubbing it in everyone's face and lifting up Seth Rollins going, "Yeah, I proved you wrong, I'm awesome," and it's like commentators telling him to stop being a cocky prick. You're in a team, damn it. He was in American Alpha once before, surely you can remember that, otherwise you think we're really that dumb to forget such a thing. Oh well, these things happen. And speaking of the Shield connection even more, Roman Reigns then had an interview with Renee Young, and it did exactly what it said on the tin. It was fine. It made sure that Reigns was pumped and ready to beat Samoa Joe in for what happened to Dean Ambrose. It made him feel like a legitimate badass, and on the mic front, Reigns did a good job. So again, I can't complain about this segment, it worked off quite nicely. And we then followed up with the first bad segment of the evening, Bray Wyatt versus Apollo Crews. Now, if you want to showcase Bray Wyatt as a ruthless, aggressive son of a bitch, have him beat Apollo Crews quickly, which did not happen because they decided, stupidly, to have Apollo Crews look good. You can't balance it either way because it makes Bray look worse. Especially considering the recent booking he's had for the entirety of last year, you need him to look good against another opponent, even if it isn't an underutilized Apollo Crews. Overall, the match went way too long and didn't really benefit either man, so for me, it's the first strike of this entire Wrestling Rant chronology, because seriously, I didn't enjoy this at all. It was just ridiculously overdone, and it did not benefit Crews or Wyatt. Speaking of what did, however, benefit things, Matt Hardy's promo afterwards. That was awesome. funny as ever, and just a shade of creepy and a shade of utter hilarity watching Bray Wyatt's confused facial expression, because for the first time he's been out-weirded by someone who really should have no business doing this. The Broken Woken character is still just as funny as it was in TNA, and I can't wait to see how bombastic it gets from here. The next stage in the Alexa Bliss scenario for the entire evening played off with a backstage segment with Nia Jax. Now, this was of course to further tension between the two, as the Mixed Match Challenge pairings have been announced, and Jax has been hanging around Enzo lots, and Bliss feels completely and utterly marginalised. It's all well and good. It did its job putting Bliss further into the corner, knowing she's facing Asuka next. Oh boy, it's going to be really interesting to see where their dynamic goes, especially knowing the Women's Rumble's coming up. Can you imagine if Jax wins it and goes on to face Bliss for the championship? I wouldn't mind seeing that, because it would be a good way to crown Jax, but I don't want to see her win the Rumble either. The fact is, the segment was fine, it did its job, despite a bit of corny dialogue, and I'm still not convinced on Jax's mic ability. She sounds way too nice for a woman who is portrayed incredibly intimidatingly, so maybe they need to change that up. And speaking of Alexa Bliss, we go into that match with Asuka. Now, this was of course a test for Alexa, and overall, the match started off stilted and slow, but built into a very back and forth aggressive contest that showcased both women solidly. Overall, putting Asuka over is a good thing. You want to keep that undefeated streak going, and overall, it was pretty decent. And it gives Asuka a future title shot on a plate if she doesn't win the Raw Rumble. So, at Elimination Chamber, which I believe is the next Raw pay-per-view, Asuka may have the title, she may win it, and then Lord knows what's happening, but that may be problematic if the Jax thing I've just noted comes to fruition. The match was good, had a solid finish, and it wasn't anything to really shout home about, but they're probably trying to reserve that potential for another time they face in the future. So, let's see where it goes from here. We then had a Renee Young and Samoa Joe backstage segment hyping up the IC title match later on in the evening, and oh, good lord. Samoa Joe threw Dean Ambrose under the bus right in front of his wife. Best thing I've heard all year thus far on the mic, and his intensity and aggression and overall the energy that Samoa Joe brings on the mic continues to make me smile. And overall, I was looking forward to this match, but before we could get to that, obviously, we had to deal with a Braun Strowman squash, which was between Rhino and Heath Slater. The match kind of descended into absolute hilarity, with Heath getting in the ring and getting flattened, and then they just got hit with so many power slams. Everyone loved it. The crowd were egging Strowman on, and no wonder, because they love watching Strowman beat the crap out of people, because he makes it so awesome. And not to mention his verbal berating of Heath was just fantastic, and it showed why people love Strowman. He's not just a silent big guy with no charisma. He's got frickin' charisma, and it's fun to see. So overall, the segment would have probably gone into strike territory if not for Strowman's charisma alone, people. It was worth doing. And we followed up with that with a Reigns and Rollins backstage segment to further set up Reigns' match, because you need to. The promo was almost strike-worthy right up until Jason Jordan interjected with a brilliant, encouraging pep talk, saying that we're going to be out there to help you whatever happens, and he came across more like a cocky, condescending prick, which is exactly what the storyline needs. So, yeah, the segment was so awkward up until that point, and then it just went into good territory. So, Jason Jordan, you may have your character be in utter doldrums at the minute, but you're making it work. You're making it work, so putting you as a tag champion thanks to the injury could be the best thing that happened to your career, since you won with American Alpha back in NXT. Let's hope it builds, because this could be quite good going forward to the WrestleMania season. Not finished with Strowman yet, because he had a backstage segment with Kane taking out Lesnar in the Rumble match. Now, why did we need this? Because seriously, you could have let Paul Heyman do this job in the promo at the end of the night, right? Couldn't you? And it's just pointless. For me, the segment just was not necessary. We know that Strowman does things on his own turf. Do we really need reminding of that, having seen him for the last year doing exactly that? Overall, the segment was just pointless, unnecessary, and actually quite tepid compared to what else we've seen tonight, and it gets the second strike. The fact is, again, we didn't need this, and logically, it wasn't worth it. The main event for this Raw Rumble, on Raw at least, isn't looking the most entertaining because it just feels a bit strange. And this kind of thing makes sense for it, because I only care about Strowman. Lesnar I lost care for when he hasn't been appearing on the show for ages, and Kane hasn't looked as amazing as he should be despite being built like a monster like he was 20 bloody years ago. Lord knows how, but there we go. And we follow that up with Angle and Finn Balor of all people, putting himself into the Royal Rumble match. Now, if that was the segment alone, I would have given it a strike and the review would have been over, but he reformed the Balor Club. Well, we say he reformed it, it's all but in name, as Gallows and Anderson were teaming with him later on in the night against The Miz, Taraj and Elias. Now, that's great, because the segment was saved by a literal gobsmacking moment where the marks can go completely insane, and that is all well and good. The servants of the purpose for this promo did its job, the Balor Club is no longer a merchandising tag, and we can keep an eye on Finn Balor going into WrestleMania, because this could make things very interesting indeed. We now get on to the match that everyone's looking forward to, the IC title match between Roman Reigns and Samoa Joe, where Roman Reigns would be disqualified, he would lose the championship. And boy did they play that into the story, with the referee doing great psychological elements, Samoa Joe wanting Reigns to disqualify him by hitting him in the face with the chairs and the stairs, and it was really quite physical, hard-hitting, back and forth, intense, and it was exactly the kind of title match you'd expect on a pay-per-view, let alone on Monday Night Raw. The fact is, it was heavy-hitting, the crowd were into it from the bell, and they even cheered Reigns for the majority, which shows that, yeah, with the right opponents and the right circumstances, Roman Reigns can show himself well in psychological, good, intense match circumstances. The match was the best of the night without any serious doubt, and overall, I felt good going into and being around the third hour, because I thought, yeah, we're into around the third hour now, we're slowly into it, this is all working. About, what to say, about 45 minutes, half an hour or so left of the show, it should be fine from here. However, we hit the final roadblock with Paul Heyman and Kurt Angle with a backstage segment that for the first time made Paul Heyman's words seem contrived and worthless. Yes, it was basically just Heyman rehashing the segment we saw earlier with Lesnar and Strowman, and saying, look, if this happens, it was just so unnecessary and pointless, because again, you could utilise the promo. Put someone else in this position. You don't need to build up the narrative step by step by step like this. We're not dumb. We know that we can have this highlighted to us in a long promo segment where Heyman can blast his mouth. And it annoys me that they had to do this twice in the same night. So overall, ladies and gentlemen, it's a strike, and that is the third one, so this Raw episode is out. It got pretty much the entire way through without hitting the 3, which is a good start to the year. The rest of the segments, well, they were not as good. Goldust and Cedric Alexander versus Gulag and Daivari was about as formulaic a match as you can get, and it would have probably been given a strike on top of that. The Elias song gets an automatic strike from me because I don't like Elias's singing. Everyone else seems to, but that's not for me because it's kind of cringy. The Balor Club versus Elias and Miz Taraj was nothing. It was a short vehicle to get the Balor Club over. Makes sense for that. The Lesnar Heyman in-ring promo was fine up until the ending when, of course, everyone brawls, but we've seen that so many times in feuds regarding Lesnar, so it just didn't seem right, and it was not that big an ending. It felt rather flat in comparison, so there we have it. Raw, I felt this week, was pretty good. It had a few obvious little duds, but overall, the course of most of the night, for almost all the 3 hours, I was mostly entertained, so that's not bad for the first show of the year, is it? As we go forth to look at SmackDown. Things kicked off on the first Blue Brand show of the new year with a AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan and Shane McMahon promo segment. Now, while this did stir the pot for later on in the evening, overall, it didn't really set my soul on fire. It was bland, it was benign, and it really didn't highlight that much tension going forth into the main event. It was just there. The cookie-cutter babyface promo from AJ Styles was bland. Bryan and Shane just bickering and not realising they have 3 weeks to advance the plot exponentially means they have to stall and highlight these tactics, and it just didn't really float my boat, and the first segment of the night gets a strike. It just wasn't to my liking. You think that it would be worth more and have much more biting critique and mic work abilities and better lines and better crowd investment, because everyone wants to see where this goes, but The segment just did not hit on any cylinder for me, and it gets the first strike of the evening. We then follow up into the Tag Team Championship match between the Usos, Shelton Benjamin and Chad Gable, and of course, this was a good chance to showcase the challengers as legit people. Now, of course, it was back and forth and physical. Logically, you'd expect that from an Usos match, because it's damn fun every time they wrestle anyone. And the fact is, Benjamin and Gable won the match, but illegal tags and interferences and pins that weren't technically legal meant the referees made a mistake, which they acknowledged on television, and then restarted it, allowing for an even more hard-hitting, longer drawn-out procession to happen before the end result of the Usos winning came about. The match was fun, exciting, and the tension upon realising that, oh god, we nearly had a title change on the first show of the year was really quite interesting. And it shows the referees aren't actually that watertight when it comes to their decisions. Maybe they can learn to reverse decisions in other matches where it makes valid sense. And overall, it shows that Benjamin and Gable can go, and I hope they will be tag team champions in the future. We then cut to backstage featuring Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens and interviewing with Renee Young, and it was pretty much about as what you get from these two. It was funny, with Zayn playing his happy-go-lucky heel to perfection, while Kevin Owens just broke down every single question that she threw at them in the blunt fashion you would again expect. They're entertaining as a duo, the mic work works nicely, and it provides cockiness going into the latter match, which is exactly what you need, because of course Kevin Owens, through interference, beat AJ Styles last week, and they think, you know what, we can do this again, because even though they've thrown a lot of things into our corner by putting everyone at ringside, it's indeed possible. We have to then suspend our disbelief to believe it actually couldn't be. Which is fine. The segment did its job, and I'm happy with that. But then we get to Breezango and the Bludgeon Brothers, of course the Ascension last week, forced them, or coerced them into the match, and, well, the match didn't happen. They got beaten up before the bell, the Ascension tried to make the save and got beaten up themselves, and what does this build to exactly? The Bludgeon Brothers beating both teams, delegitimizing them, meaning the SmackDown Tag Division gets less because those two are nowhere near the title picture? Overall, it just felt really predictable and stale, and I missed the Fashion Files. Why did they stick that on the internet? I want to watch it on my show, because it's one of the most entertaining, funny things on SmackDown, and they got rid of it because apparently it takes up too much time on a 2-hour show where you're not really doing anything with these teams in the first place. It is a second strike. This just did not do anything for me. And we then go through to another backstage segment featuring the New Day, Rusev, and Aiden English, of course, hyping up the US title tournament match that would happen directly afterwards, of course. The funny nuances of the New Day is still entertaining despite the relatively stale nature of it, and of course Rusev and English highlighting Rusev Day as every day, and everything else is just still fun. And, yeah, it's over as hell, and it makes it enjoyable watching the crowd pop for it. And it's good. Enough said, the segment did its job, and I can be somewhat happy about that. I'm not going to be too critical. I could have given it a strike if I wanted to, but I won't. And overall, we go into the Xavier Woods Aiden English match with a little bit of positivity on our heads. Now, Rusev's singing was cringeworthy, but the match itself, albeit a very short one, did enough to renew my vigour by proving that yes, Xavier Woods and Aiden English can wrestle, and they work together with surprisingly good chemistry. Overall, I felt these two are very underrated and underutilised in the ring, and it's good to see them get a chance to showcase themselves, albeit how bloody short the match ended up becoming. Xavier Woods advances, and it was overall a fun match to watch, even though, like I keep having to point out, it was mind-numbingly short. I wish it was a little longer, because I want to see these two showcase themselves. We haven't really seen it, but it overall did the job. And I've got to say, it was nice to have a good, honest match between a loved face and a despised heel in the semi-finals, as Jinder and Xavier look to put on an interesting contest next week. Good lord, I'm actually kind of worried how Jinder's gonna go against Xavier. Then again, that's something to look forward to, isn't it? We then cut back to the Welcoming Committee, who of course reformed last week, taking on the Riot Squad in a 6-woman tag match coming up next. And, well, I would have given this a strike if it didn't serve its purpose well, but it did. Every single woman had short, concise, and very to-the-point mic work that fit their characters. And even though I don't like Natalya, and I find Tamina as boring and bland and flat as a piece of wood drifting off into the ocean, and Lana in the ring is pretty much garbage, Carmella's the only one I actually like in terms of in-ring and character work, so the fact that all these guys got the chance to highlight themselves well, on the mic at least, was good. They played to their strengths, and the segment served its purpose. But we then get to the match itself, and, well, I just don't care. I don't care for the Riot Squad. I don't care for this multi-woman tag match merry-go-round that seems to happen every bloody week with these women. For God's sake, you can think of putting them in singles matches, put them in backstage fights, and make it feel like it's an intense brawl for supremacy. We've had multi-women battles on Raw and SmackDown in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's really stale. And having multi-women tag matches every week because you've got a lack of time and you can't do more than one match on the show really doesn't help matters. And overall, I just did not like this. It just didn't work for me. The Riot Squad got the victory, but then hearing Ruby Riot's face theme song for a heel team every time makes me very angry. And as you can tell, it's Third Strike City. This SmackDown review is out before even the first hour had even passed, or maybe it had. Lord knows that first hour had passed, but not by much going into this. And yeah, that isn't a good sign. Following on from that, Charlotte, Naomi, and a returning Becky Lynch formulated another multi-person beatdown, setting up another multi-person match next week. If it wasn't for Becky Lynch's return, that would have been a strike. They then showed, on my version of this, I don't know if it's on the US syndicated version, they then showed the entirety of the Brock Lesnar, Paul Heyman, Kane segment at the end of Raw again, in its entirety with no cuts. Excuse me, you have about 5-10 minutes to fill with something else. You could at least have done that better. Seriously, we don't need to go back to the days of 2004 or 5 where you showed Raw highlight packages to fill in time. You don't need to do that anymore. Stupid. Utterly, utterly stupid. Baron Corbin's backstage piece announcing his support in the Rumble, I would have given that a strike as well, because I want qualifying matches. I hate wrestlers just saying I'm in the Rumble. Remember in 2004 when John Cena and Chris Benoit had to fight through qualifiers to get into the Rumble, so you built up support for them going into the match? That was amazing. And we don't see that anymore, and it boils my piss. On top of that, we get to the final match of the night, of course, AJ Styles and Sami Zayn. It was just about as good as you'd expect from two very agile, athletic people, and the interference jiggery-pokery regarding Shane, Daniel Bryan, and Kevin Owens was nicely done. It built up tension as it went on because you were waiting for that initial starting block to be fired, and it did, and Sami won, and then the announcement of the handicap title match at the Rumble was just about as epic as you'd think because no one saw it coming, and it leads to a very interesting match indeed. So while the night ended on a high, the SmackDown as a whole was okay to poor. It wasn't the best show in the world. Because, okay, the first hour had most of the best chunks of it, but then gradually it just descended over time into something that was quite bad. I mean, most of the women's stuff I don't care about, and a lot of the mid-card just feels non-existent right now, because a lot of wrestlers like Nakamura and Orton and Rude and people like that, and of course Ziggler, who's not on the show at all, weren't even there. So, the first SmackDown of the new year was a kind of dab squib, despite a couple of good moments to pick from. Raw definitely beat it this week. And with that, the first episode of the new Wrestling Rant is complete. I hope you've all enjoyed, and let's see how the rest of the year goes, and of course the Rumble goes, before we can start really pinning down how awful or good WWE's year is going to be, because it was a bit lopsided this week, and I'm hoping for some different things going forward. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more of the weekly Raw and SmackDown analysis, along with pay-per-view reviews as well, then click the subscribe button down there. I would gratefully appreciate it, and your opinions of Raw and SmackDown can be placed in the comment section below, where I will see if you agree or disagree with my observations. So I will see you all next week for another show, and let's hope that after a, I would say, solid start to the year, things can improve going into the Royal Rumble as all the bits fall into place. I have been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this has been the reinvigorated return of Wrestling Rant to the CC Network, and I will see you all next time.